2 years ago, I did something I thought may never happen. After 4 years of steady work, two good friends of mine and I released the demo of our game, Yokai Moon. This was my very first large game project. I'd made little prototypes before when I was in school for game design, so I wasn't completely new to game dev, but before I started working on Yokai Moon, the longest project I'd ever worked on was only about a half hour of play. And the demo of Yokai Moon, by contrast, can take anywhere between 5 to 6 hours to complete depending on the player. To celebrate the 2-year anniversary of the demo release, I decided to play through Yokai Moon again. And it was so interesting to revisit some of my older work because I was really able to clearly see how I've grown and developed as a designer over the last few years. I learned a lot from working on Yokai Moon, and I feel like I'm better able to identify what exactly those lessons are now that I've gained more experience and worked on other games. And I want to share a few of those lessons. So without further ado, here are 3 things that I wish I'd done differently for my first game. The number 1 thing I wish I'd done differently was started playtesting sooner. By the time someone besides me actually played Yokai Moon, it had been in development for 2 years, and a large portion of the gameplay was already complete. We'd implemented the core gameplay loop, which is the cycle of actions or mechanics the player loops through the most often while they play. In the case of Yokai Moon, the general loop is upkeep, where you feed villagers, assign them actions, and equip items, all depending on the waves of enemies coming at night. The heart of the game's strategy is here. The second part of the loop is combat and travel, where your villagers defend the fortress, go to the market, or go to the forest. The final step of the loop is the daily review, where you get a summary of what happened and sometimes make decisions for the fortress. This core loop for our tower defense game was really all that was needed in order to start playtesting. But when we started playtesting, not only was the core loop implemented, but I had finished programming all 6 different enemy types with their own special abilities, 20 villagers also with their own unique special abilities, over 20 items, foraging and feeding, random events, some of the quests, the market, and the end of day review, which was way too much. What we should have done was implemented the core gameplay loop with 1 villager, 1 enemy type, and maybe a couple of early game items, and literally nothing else, and then started playtesting. Now, why would this have been a better method? First, it would have helped with scope. Neither my friend nor I had worked on any full-length games at this point, so we didn't have the best judgment yet when it came to estimating the size and scale of a project. We thought it would take us about a year to make this game, like a year tops. Now, looking back, I can easily see why it took us as long as it did. It was an ambitious undertaking, given that we had only ever made prototypes in school. If we'd playtested earlier and we saw how long it actually took players to go through the game, like 5 or 6 hours instead of our anticipated 2, then we could have cut back on some of the content and made the scope of our project more reasonable, which would have made the development process easier on ourselves. We became pretty burnt out as the years went on. Playtesting sooner also would have helped us identify problem areas earlier and given us time to address them. As a designer, you will undoubtedly have weaknesses, no matter how experienced you are or how experienced you become. Your game will not be perfect, especially not the first build. So if you're working in a small team or doing things solo, I think playtesting is your best bet at pinpointing those gaps in your design and fixing them. For example, one of the weakest areas of Yokai Moon that playtesters pointed out was its general interface and usability. Equipping items and switching them between villagers is an integral element of the game's strategy, and the system was clunky and time-consuming for players. It was consistently brought up by playtesters, but since it was already fully implemented and we had designed further features around this interface, it would have been a huge task to go back and redesign the whole system from scratch and then fix all of the other features it related to. So we kept it, even though it wasn't the best design, and we just tried to find workarounds to make it slightly more usable. However, if we had playtested earlier and realized that this was a problem earlier on, we could have just avoided doing all the work of creating dependent features on this interface system, and we could have gone back to the drawing board and made something that was simply better. Playtesting isn't just about getting constructive criticism, although that is a big part of it. Playtesting is also about assessing what your game does well. Understanding how and why players become engaged with your game is just as useful as understanding how and why they become frustrated. Knowing what makes your game enjoyable and engaging means that you can strengthen those mechanics and add in content that is similar. For example, our playtesters really loved that there were 20 different characters, each with their own abilities, and that you couldn't unlock them all in one playthrough. If we playtested earlier and understood that this was a draw for players, it would have let us know that this was something to avoid cutting unless absolutely necessary. Finally, playtesting is motivating. There's nothing like watching someone play a game that you've made and get super into it. Hearing what players like can really help with burnout. It's motivating to hear that people like your work. It makes all the long hours and frustrations and stress feel worth it. In conclusion, playtest early and playtest often. Playtesting is an opportunity for you to better assess the scope of your project, understand both the strengths and weaknesses of your game, and stay motivated. Quick sidebar here. Given all the benefits of playtesting, I've spent some time reflecting on why I didn't playtest earlier. And I can't speak for my colleagues, but I think a large part of the reason why I didn't playtest and share my work earlier was because I was scared. Sharing your work as an artist can be really hard, especially if it's your first project or two. You don't want to be judged, and I get that. But I think part of becoming a great game designer is getting over your fear of sharing your creative work and understanding that making a good game means welcoming constructive criticism. You don't have to accept that criticism or allow it to shape your game's design, but you should at least consider it. Plus, it's comforting to remember that the first build of any game is going to be a trash fire, and that's also okay. I think most people understand when you're just showing them a draft. The important thing is to just get something down on paper, so to speak, because you can't edit a blank document. You can, however, edit incoherent word vomit into something cohesive, and maybe something amazing. Okay, sidebar over. The second thing I wish I would have done differently is how I managed design documentation. For me, one of the most challenging things about working on Yokai Moon was keeping proper documentation. Since it was a passion project that I worked on with mostly one other person for most of development, it was really easy to feel like we would just remember stuff and it was safe to keep it in our brains and not write it down. There were occasions where we'd discuss some aspect of the game design and we'd come to an agreement about what we wanted to do, but then it wouldn't be time to implement this feature until months or even years later. And we would keep notes on things and make spreadsheets, but often these weren't detailed enough, or we didn't think things through to the extent that they needed to be thought through. Then when I would go to implement that feature, I would run into some issue with the design that we hadn't thought through, and so I would need to stop and we would need to discuss it before I could continue programming. In retrospect, I really wish that I had made a proper design document for this game. And if you're a solo dev, making a design document might seem like a waste of time or unnecessary, but I strongly advise you to do it anyway. Actually writing things down in detail, as if you're explaining them to a totally new and different person, is going to help you keep yourself organized and also help you make sure that you're really thinking things all the way through. It's also useful for version control and reviewing the different iterations of your game that you've made in case you need to go back and check something. Lastly, I wish I'd kept better documentation of my code. When it came to the documentation of my code, I just didn't do it for the first year and a half. Big mistake. If I had known to leave comments for myself describing what my code was doing and just been better about organization, I would have saved myself a lot of headaches and frankly prevented a lot of bugs that I then spent a lot of time fixing. There were times that I'd forget I'd used a certain variable name for something, and then I'd use it again, and then things would break and I wouldn't know why. Or I would reference an object that I forgot I'd programmed already to be destroyed. Poor documentation of my code actually became a huge problem for me towards the end of the project when I was implementing the save system and I was pulling values from literally everywhere, but I didn't keep these things organized, and so I didn't really know, except through trial and error, what all I needed to be saving. One thing I actually think I did pretty well in terms of documentation was I kept pretty detailed notes about what changed from build to build. There were multiple times where I had to drastically change the way that I had programmed a feature, and I would always leave really detailed notes about what I had changed and where, and which particular version number I needed to go back to in order to get to the old version. This was extremely helpful because my code was so disorganized, so making changes would often impact the game system in ways that I couldn't predict. Being able to go back and reference an older version where everything was working really helped me pinpoint where things were going wrong in the new version. So I would definitely recommend keeping detailed notes in terms of version control and also keeping backups of all of your older builds of your game. There are a number of other little things that I noticed when I was playing through Yokai Moon. For example, I think there were a number of places where giving the player more feedback would have improved the game's design, like indicating when a villager used their special ability. But overall, I'm really proud of this project. I think we did an amazing job with the skills and experience that we had at the time. Obviously, I can see the flaws in it more clearly now that I'm a better designer, but I think that's actually a good thing. I learned so much from Yokai Moon, but the 3 big standout lessons are definitely playtesting as soon as possible and keeping good documentation of both design and code. I hope that you learned something new from this video, or perhaps it gave you an opportunity to reflect back on some of the things that you've learned as you've grown and changed as an artist. Best of luck on all your projects, and I'll catch you next time.